I've always loved scary stories since I can remember. I remember getting those books of short horror stories for kids that were full of urban legends and folk tales, like the one about that woman with the ribbon around her neck. Then her unlucky husband removes it one day and her head falls off. I remember checking out children's books that were illustrated with stills from old Universal horror films like House of Frankenstein or The Mummy. And as I got older, I read and I watched whatever scary books and movies I could get my hands on. And I still love horror. I write it, I read it, I watch it, but zombies and vampires and wolfmen, they don't scare me the way they did when I was little. I believe that monsters are real, though. It was spring break of my freshman year in college. I didn't have any plans, so I went home to Raleigh, North Carolina for break. A lot of my friends had gone to college in the States, so I spent some time hanging out with them. And I made plans to drive down to Wilmington for the day to see Jessie Faulkner. Jessie was one of my best friends in high school. She was a petite blonde girl with a bizarre sense of humor and a love for all things geeky. She was one of the few people I knew that obsessively quoted Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And she was one of the 6 other people in Latin Club with me at our high school. She was the one that introduced me to anime by lending me her copy of Akira. And her post-college career goals alternated between archaeologist and comic book artist. And she was genuinely one of the nicest, sweetest people I knew. She was friendly to everyone she met, as much friendly in high school as it was in the real world. So even though Wilmington was a 2-hour trip each way from Raleigh, I made plans to come down and spend the day. She introduced me to a new circle of friends and showed me around campus and Wilmington, making sure to hit the nearest comic book shop and taking a matinee of the Dawn of the Dead remake because, as I said, she loved geeky stuff. Some of her friends from school came along, and there was this one guy named Curtis who spent a lot of time chatting me up. He had a pretty good knowledge of comic books and zombie movies, so I didn't mind that he seemed to take every chance he could of glomming on to Jessie and me. At the end of the day, before I drove back to Raleigh, we finally managed to ditch Curtis. As I drove Jessie back, she said that she felt like he was stalking her. She was sick of it. She'd even talked to some teachers about it, but it didn't seem to make much of a difference. I empathized, but there wasn't much I could do other than that. A month later, I was back at Northwestern when I received a phone call from my friend Linda. She said Jessie had been murdered. I couldn't believe it. She was supposed to be heading back to Raleigh that day. But Linda told me that the night before, an acquaintance of hers named Curtis had convinced her to come back to his room where he'd drugged her, raped her, and strangled her. It was the first time anyone I knew had died violently, and that it was my kindest, gentlest friend, and that I'd met the person who did it. It's stupid, I know, to think that I could have changed things if I'd paid more attention. After all, Curtis had fooled professors and administrators. His father had been on the university's board of trustees and helped fake parts of his application to cover up a history of expulsions and a dishonorable discharge from the Marines. But it bothered me that I could connect on even a superficial level with a man who had done such an awful thing to one of my best friends. It still bothers me. It serves as a reminder that real, everyday people can be more horrifying than made-up monsters in our imaginations. Curtis committed suicide in the psych ward he was being held at, pending trial. He threw himself head first from the top of a staircase